My life is built on quiet foundations. It's a life I've carefully crafted, far from the chaos of my family. My name is Chloe, and I thought I had everything under control. I was wrong. The house breathes with me. I feel its life in the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, in the whisper of salty air that rolls in from the Maine coast, and in the way the sunlight slants through the arched windows of my writing room every morning. At 35, this historic home is more than just a place to live. It's my sanctuary, a fortress I've lovingly restored and filled with my own memories. It's a testament to the independence I've fought for, a peace I earned through years of late nights writing and the quiet guidance of my grandmother's will. She left this place to me, knowing it was the only inheritance that mattered. My independence isn't a concept. It's a foundation of stone and a roof of slate, $1 million property she knew I would protect. But not everyone saw it that way. My Aunt Evelyn, a woman whose glamour has always masked a parasitic streak, saw only a lost opportunity. "A house like that should be for the whole family, Chloe," she once told me, her voice dripping with a sweetness that soured the moment she thought I wasn't listening. Her husband, Frank, is the perfect companion for her brand of entitlement, a perpetually unemployed grifter with a knack for talking his way out of responsibility. They've always been a specter of resentment in my life, a constant reminder that my good fortune is their great injustice. I try to keep them at arm's length, but they have a way of worming their way back in. My best friend, Sarah, a sharp lawyer who has helped me navigate my grandmother's estate, has been my quiet anchor through it all. "Just be careful, Liv," she'd warned me, using the old nickname. Evelyn sees everything in terms of what she can get. It's a sickness. Her words, a confirmation of my own deep-seated suspicions, have echoed in my mind ever since. My quiet nature has always been a cage, a place I've been confined by my family's perceptions. But it's also a weapon. I've taken small, silent precautions, subtle measures to ensure that my home, my life, and my inheritance are protected. I don't want to believe they would betray me. Not truly, but a small part of me, the part that has seen their greed up close, knows it's a distinct possibility. I made a few small but significant changes to my house's legal documents, just for insurance. It feels like a betrayal of my own to distrust them, but a storm cloud is gathering on the horizon. Just yesterday, my phone lit up with a text message from Evelyn. "We need to talk." And now, the doorbell rings. My heart pounds against my ribs as I look through the peephole. My aunt and uncle stand there, their faces unreadable, and I know this is the beginning of the end. I didn't answer the door. I just watched their shadows through the stained glass window beside the frame, the shapes of my aunt and uncle growing taller and more distorted as they stood there, waiting. After a minute, the ringing stopped. Frank's voice, a low rumble, drifted through the wood. "She's not home, Ev." Evelyn's sigh was a sharp exhalation of frustration. "Of course she is. She's just hiding." The echo of their footsteps as they walked away filled the sudden silence. The dread they instilled wasn't new. It had been simmering for years, a thick poison that had tainted every family gathering since my grandmother's passing. I remember the day I got the call from Sarah. The words, so simple and legal, should have been a source of pure joy. "Your grandmother left you the house, Chloe. Everything." The house, this house, was a gift. It was a home I'd cherished since childhood, a place filled with the smell of my grandmother's baking and the warmth of her smile. But when I told Evelyn, her face, usually so composed, fractured into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "She left it all to you, her favorite." Her voice was a hiss of contempt. To her, it wasn't an inheritance. It was a personal slight, a public declaration that she had been passed over. The years that followed were a chronicle of their financial recklessness. Frank would launch a new business venture that inevitably collapsed, and Evelyn would spend her days complaining about her lot in life, her sense of entitlement, a festering wound she never let heal. Their calls were always the same, a cheerful opening, followed by a somber account of their hard times, and a thinly veiled request for money. My grandmother's legacy to them was just a bank account they felt I was selfishly hoarding. The worst night was a year ago, at my parents' annual holiday party. Frank, as usual, was nursing a half-empty glass of whiskey, a sour expression on his face. Evelyn, fueled by too much wine, cornered me in the kitchen. "It's a disgrace, Chloe," she'd slurred, her words thick with bitter resentment. "You know that house was meant to be mine. I'm her flesh and blood." She jabbed a finger into my chest. "You're a thief, Chloe. A clever, quiet little thief. You manipulated her, you know. You stole what was rightfully mine." Her face, a contorted mask of jealousy, was so ugly it made my stomach churn. I had walked away, my heart pounding, convinced that I was just a victim of her bitter rage. But her words, "You stole what was rightfully mine," never left me. They've echoed in my mind ever since, a chilling reminder of the resentment that now stands on my doorstep, waiting to get in. My gut, that quiet, insistent voice I'd always trusted, was screaming. It started after a phone call where Evelyn, thinking I was on mute, mentioned the house fund to Frank. The term was so brazen, so clinical that it chilled me to my core. The resentment I had always dismissed as sibling rivalry was something far more dangerous. It was a strategy. I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. My home, my sanctuary, was a target. I drove to Sarah's office, the tires humming a tense rhythm on the asphalt. Her law firm, with its polished glass and stoic granite, felt like the kind of fortress I needed. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable as I recounted my suspicions. The little digs, the probing questions, the phone call. "You need to protect yourself, Chloe," she said simply, her voice a calm anchor in my rising panic. "And the best way to do that is to make sure your bait isn't what they think it is." Over the next few weeks, we moved in silence, a two-person army working in the periphery. Sarah helped me create a legal shell corporation, a faceless entity with a perfectly sterile name, to which I would transfer the deed of my house. I was no longer the direct owner. My home was now a piece of paper, a line in a corporate ledger. This felt strangely freeing, as if I had put on a suit of armor no one could see. The legal jargon was a language of protection, a series of codes that kept my most valuable assets safe. The house was bait, and I was setting the trap. The second part of the plan was a digital ghost. I installed a secure digital tripwire, a line of code buried deep in the public records database. The moment anyone, without my permission, accessed the house's financial or legal documents, I would receive a silent alert. It was a burglar, alarm for my legacy, and it felt like a cold, beautiful piece of retribution. I was fighting their greed with my own quiet brilliance. The lie I told my parents was the hardest part. I called them, my voice filled with a careful tenderness. "I'm updating my will," I said, my voice shaking just enough to sound sincere. "I'm leaving a portion of my estate to a new charity." They swallowed the flimsy excuse whole. They were so relieved I was thinking about my future, they never questioned the present. With the lie in place and the trap set, I felt a quiet wave of triumph wash over me. The house was no longer mine, but it was safe. It was bait, and I just had to wait for them to come and take it. The late afternoon sun was a golden haze, casting long shadows over my grandmother's backyard. The air, thick with the smell of charcoal and sizzling burgers, was alive with the sound of 100 conversations. Family was everywhere, a sea of familiar faces and boisterous laughter. My parents were there, my cousins were there, and, as always, my Aunt Evelyn and her husband Frank were there, their presence a faint but constant source of unease in the beautiful chaos. I was in my element, a quiet observer of the life that pulsed through the home I loved so dearly. I felt a sense of profound peace, a feeling I now realize was terribly fragile. I watched Evelyn make her way through the crowd, a glass of rosé in her hand, her face flushed with a mixture of alcohol and confidence. She was all theatrical smiles, laughing a little too loudly at a joke from my father. My gut, however, was a cold, hard knot. I saw her signal Frank with a subtle nod, and they both moved toward the center of the patio, clearing their throats dramatically. The noise of the party slowly began to die down, all eyes on them. "Family, can I have your attention, please?" Evelyn's voice rang out, her tone a perfect blend of authority and false sincerity. "Frank and I have something very exciting to announce." A hush fell over the crowd. 1,000 curious faces all turned in their direction. I felt my heart begin to pound against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of pure dread. Evelyn put an arm around Frank's waist, her smile widening. "We've decided to move in with Chloe." The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched, heavy and suffocating, over the entire backyard. I saw my parents' faces, frozen in a mask of stunned disbelief. Frank, his chest puffed out with a newfound confidence, nodded with a self-important air. "It's what's best for the family," Evelyn added, her voice now a saccharine sweet whisper meant to sound reasonable. "With the new foundation being laid, we can all contribute to her success, and we'll be able to help her with all the responsibilities of the home." My father just stared at the ground, utterly speechless. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a silent gasp of shock. I, however, felt a wave of utter devastation wash over me. My home, my sanctuary, my life was being taken, and no one was saying a word. My father finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. I saw the silent question in them, the confusion, the pleading for me to say something, to do something, but I couldn't. My mouth was a dry, empty chasm. The ground was being ripped from under me, and I was utterly powerless to stop it. My parents' silence was a betrayal, a wall of silence that surrounded me. I was completely alone. My heart, a trapped bird, was about to break free. The sanctity of my home has been shattered. The quiet hum of the refrigerator is now drowned out by the grating sound of my Aunt Evelyn's voice, directing Frank on where to put her gaudy floral sofa. They arrived with a moving truck full of their clutter and an air of complete entitlement, as if they were doing me a favor by gracing my space with their presence. The scent of my grandmother's lavender sachets has been replaced by Evelyn's cheap perfume. My sanctuary is now their playground. "Don't worry, honey," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness as she watched me flinch. "Grandma wanted us to have a place to land. She told me so herself." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. A secret verbal agreement? I knew it was a lie, a fabricated story designed to justify their blatant land grab, but the rest of my family believed it. My parents, in their well-meaning but misguided loyalty, told me that family helps family. My protests were dismissed as an overreaction, my heartbreak a symptom of a temporary setback. I felt the walls of my home, once my refuge, begin to close in on me. I was a prisoner in a castle I no longer owned. I drove to Sarah's office, the familiar drive a blur of tears and confusion. I sat across from her mahogany desk, my lawyer, my best friend, and my only confidant. "It's all a lie, Sarah," I choked out, my voice thick with sobs. "She's just making it up." Sarah's face, usually so composed, was a mask of sympathy. She slid a thick, legal-looking folder across the desk. "I've done my research, Chloe. The deed is no longer in your name. You've transferred ownership to the shell corporation we created for the house. Legally, you are no longer the owner." My heart, already broken, shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. I knew this was my own doing, the precaution I'd taken months ago, but the bitter reality of the legal void was a betrayal I hadn't been prepared for. The world, through Evelyn's carefully crafted narrative, now saw me as the victim of a cruel legal loophole, a naive granddaughter who had been swindled by her own family. I was a sympathetic story, a cautionary tale, but I was also a ghost in my own house, a guest in my own life. I had never felt more alone. The silence in the car on the way home was deafening. How long could I keep this up? This performance of a woman who had lost everything. The scent of roasting chicken and my mother's perfume hung heavy in the air, a familiar comfort that now felt like a suffocating shroud. It was Sunday dinner, a sacred ritual in my family, but tonight the table was a stage. I sat there, a silent actress, listening to Evelyn and Frank's performance, their tearful recount of how they rescued my family from my emotional turmoil. My parents, their faces a mixture of concern and pity, watched me with the kind of gentle apprehension usually reserved for a sick child. The time was now. I rose from my chair, the scrape of wood against the floor a shockingly loud sound in the tense silence. Everyone's eyes turned to me. I made myself tremble. A genuine tremor of nerves mixed with a carefully orchestrated performance. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice thick with a carefully crafted vulnerability. "Please, you have to listen to me." My mother's face crumpled. "Chloe, darling, not now. We're all here. Let's not ruin dinner." "This isn't about dinner," I cried, letting my voice crack with a desperation I had practiced in front of a mirror. "This is about my house, my life. Evelyn and Frank have no right to just move in. My grandmother would never have wanted this." I looked at my aunt, whose face was a mask of wounded innocence. "She's lying. They're both lying. They're taking advantage of us, of you." I looked at my parents, my eyes welling up with a perfectly timed sheen of tears. This was the moment, the crucial turning point. My father placed his hand on my mother's, his face set in a look of quiet resolve. "Chloe," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "They're family. We talked about this. You're just overreacting. You're hurting and we understand that, but you need to let them help you." My mother nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Sweetheart, Evelyn has been through so much. She just needs a place to land. Family helps family." The words landed like a physical blow. A cold wave of shock and profound betrayal washed over me, a feeling so real that it almost made me forget my act. They had chosen Evelyn's lies over my truth, her calculated manipulation over my desperate plea. The illusion of my helplessness had worked perfectly. I had given them a chance to be my heroes, and they had chosen to be her pawns. I nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a hot path down my cheek. Not from sorrow, but from a cold, quiet satisfaction. The game was over. My parents were on her side. Now I could finally begin to play. My parents' words echoed in the empty halls of my home, a chorus of dismissal that chipped away at my sanity. "Family helps family," my mother had said, her voice soft but firm, a dagger coated in honey. They had chosen to believe Evelyn's lies, the secret verbal agreement, the good intentions over my pain. That betrayal, that sting of being so completely misunderstood by the people who were supposed to protect me, was a fire that burned away my helplessness. I realized I couldn't wait for them to see the truth. I had to forge it myself. My grief was no longer a paralysis. It was a quiet, cold fury. My first call was to Sarah. The sound of her voice, so sharp and grounded, felt like a lifeline in a storm. "They don't believe me, Sarah," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "My parents think I'm overreacting. They've let Evelyn and Frank in." The anger in my voice was a raw, genuine thing. They don't see it. "Then we have to make them see it, Chloe," she said, her voice hardening. "We have to give them proof. The kind of proof that's impossible to ignore." That was the moment I stopped being a victim. It was the moment I started to hunt. I told Sarah I needed a name, a private investigator who was discreet and, above all, effective. She gave me a name, Marcus Thorne. His reputation was impeccable, a man who saw what others missed. I hung up the phone, a new purpose filling me. The financial strain of hiring a private investigator was a real and present fear, but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make. It was the only way. I met Marcus in a nondescript office, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. He was a man of few words, his face a roadmap of 1,000 hard cases. "You think your aunt and uncle are lying about the house," he said, his voice flat. "I know they are," I insisted, my hands gripping the arms of my chair. "They're con artists, Marcus. They're pretending to be destitute to get their hands on my inheritance." I gave him a list of tasks, not orders, but desperate pleas for information. "I need you to track their movements, their phone calls, their bank accounts. I need you to prove that they have money, that they're not broke. I need you to find the truth, the kind of truth that can't be denied." He listened, his face an impassive mask. He said he'd get back to me. Now the waiting begins. The silence of my home, once a sanctuary, now feels like a cage. My phone buzzes with a new email from Marcus. The subject line, "Initial findings." My heart pounds against my ribs, and I know this is the beginning of the end. I was a prisoner in my own home, a ghost haunting the hallways of my sanctuary. The creak of the floorboards used to be a comfort. Now it was a signal of their approach. Evelyn and Frank had settled in like a pair of parasites, their laughter echoing through my grandmother's house as if it were their own. I spent my days in a haze of manufactured grief, a perfect, pathetic victim. But inside, I was a coiled spring, a strategist moving unseen pieces on a very real board. The time for passivity was over. Today, my desk was not a place of writing, but a staging ground. The worn leather felt cool beneath my fingertips as I meticulously crafted the bait. On my screen, I typed out a convincing email, not from a real estate agent, but from a fake one. The subject line was a carefully constructed lure. Confidential offer, unlisted coastal property. The body of the email hinted at a buyer willing to pay a premium for a quick, quiet sale. It was the kind of offer only a desperate, greedy person would fall for. Next to the laptop lay the real trap, a sleek financial portfolio with a label that read, Private Savings. Inside were pages of fabricated numbers and charts, all pointing to a secret trust fund, a fortune I had supposedly accumulated over the years without anyone knowing. It was a masterpiece of a lie, designed to make their mouths water and their suspicions vanish. I knew their kind. They wouldn't believe a small loss. They needed a big, juicy prize. They needed to believe they had found a secret that was worth every risk. The sound of Evelyn's voice from the kitchen jolted me. "Frank, have you seen the mail? The bills are ridiculous." Her fake sympathy was gone, replaced by a cold, financial fury. This was my cue. I left the folder on the desk and the laptop open, its screen a silent, glowing siren. I walked into the kitchen, my movements slow and pained, every step a part of the performance. "I just don't understand how everything costs so much," I said, my voice thin and reedy. They barely looked at me. Their eyes, once so focused on their fake concern for my well-being, were now fixated on the stack of mail. I gave a heavy sigh, a final flourish of my acting, and then excused myself. I returned to my room, pulling up the hidden camera feed on my phone. The screen flickered to life. I watched as they crept into my office, their masks of empathy dropping the second they thought they were alone. Frank's eyes landed on the portfolio first, his breath catching in his throat. Evelyn's gaze snapped to the laptop. She leaned in, her finger hovering over the email, her face a mask of avarice. The hook was set. I just had to wait for them to bite. The house, once my sanctuary, has become a prison of my own making. I live within its walls, a ghost haunting the hallways, and the air is thick with the scent of manufactured grief. I haven't opened the curtains in days, preferring the dim, forgiving light that hides the truth in the shadows. My hair is unbrushed, my clothes are a mess, and the woman staring back at me from the mirror is a stranger, a carefully crafted victim. The performance is exhausting, but it's crucial. I have to appear defeated, a broken woman who has lost everything. My parents, once a source of unwavering support, are now a constant source of quiet disappointment. They came over yesterday, their faces etched with a worry that was quickly turning into exasperation. "Chloe," my mother said, her voice laced with a cold, weary impatience. "You can't live like this. You have to try and get better." My father just nodded, his silence a heavy, suffocating weight. They've fallen for Evelyn and Frank's narrative, hook, line, and sinker. They believe my grief is a performance, but they think it's a performance born of mental instability, not strategy. They believe I'm a mess because I'm overreacting, not because I'm in control. I hear them on the phone, their hushed whispers carrying through the walls, spreading Evelyn's lies. "She's just not right in the head, you know?" I hear Evelyn say, her voice a soothing, poisonous balm. The pressure of the house, the inheritance, it's all just too much for her. And I hear my mother's reply, a sigh of profound sadness. "I just don't know what to do." The heartbreak I feel is not for the home I've supposedly lost, but for the family I'm watching crumble. The pain of their dismissal, the sting of their belief that I am a pathetic, broken woman, that part of the performance is real. It's the emotional cost of the war I'm fighting, a price I knew I would have to pay. But then, as I catch my reflection in a darkened window, I see it. A flicker, a flash of something cold and calculating that they can't see, a flash of strategic satisfaction that my plan is working. I'm not a defeated woman. I am a patient predator. I have given them every reason to believe I am a victim, and they have believed it. They have walked right into my trap, and now all I have to do is wait for the perfect moment. Just then, my phone lights up with a new email notification. It's from my bank. The money from my grandmother's trust has been moved into the Shell Corporation. My plan is in motion. The coffee shop was a refuge from the chaos of my life. It was a Tuesday morning, a safe haven away from the prying eyes of my parents and the predatory stares of Evelyn and Frank. Sarah, my best friend and legal advisor, sat across from me, her face a map of genuine concern. My hands, clutching the warm mug of coffee, were trembling just enough to be convincing. "They think I'm making it up, Sarah," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "My own parents. They keep telling me, family helps family, as if that's a license for them to just take over. Evelyn and Frank are already talking about renovations." Sarah's expression hardened. "They have no legal right to that house, Chloe. And a verbal agreement doesn't hold up in court. Not for something of that value." I let a single tear slide down my cheek. A perfect practiced bit of emotional theater. "I know that, but they don't. And what they're doing, it's working. My parents believe them. They think I'm just overreacting. They think my grief is a performance." My voice was laced with a bitterness that was half real, half acted. It was true that my heart was broken, but it was for a reason they couldn't possibly understand. "The house is my home, Sarah," I continued, my voice gaining a desperate edge. "It's my grandmother's legacy. Every inch of it, every stone, every whisper of paint is a part of her. I can't let them just take it." I feel like I'm failing her memory. I watched Sarah's face, seeing the genuine sympathy there, a balm I needed for my performance. "We won't let them," she said firmly. "I'm your lawyer, Chloe, and your friend. I'll make sure that house is safe. They're just bullies. We'll show them." I nodded slowly, letting the tears fall in earnest now. I loved Sarah. She was my rock. My only true confidant in this twisted game. She was a brilliant legal mind, a woman who could see through any lie. And she, I knew, was a necessary piece of my revenge. But she didn't know the full story. She couldn't. My revenge was too personal, too complicated. I was a victim, and she was my champion. She was the one who would fight my battles for me, all while I sat back and watched my plan unfold. "We need to do something, Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. "We can't just let them get away with this. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." She squeezed my hand, a look of profound resolve in her eyes. I knew what she was going to say next, and I was ready for it. The living room was alive with the sickening sweetness of false victory. The air, normally filled with the scent of old books and sea salt, now reeked of cheap champagne and a cloying floral perfume. Evelyn and Frank were at the center of it all, basking in the glow of my parents' praise. They stood side by side, a gruesome portrait of deceit, holding a manila folder with the air of two generals who had just won a war. "We did it," Evelyn announced, her voice thick with a fake, tearful emotion. "We secured the house." Frank nodded gravely. "It wasn't easy. You know how Chloe has been lately. Her mental state, it was a ticking clock. We had to move fast to save the property from her complete breakdown." My parents, bless their blind hearts, looked at them with an almost worshipful admiration. My father clapped Frank on the back, and my mother hugged Evelyn, her face a mask of profound relief. They believed this lie, hook, line, and sinker. They saw heroes where I saw vultures, and their pride in them was a bitter poison that burned in my throat. Evelyn, basking in the glow, opened the folder to a thick, official-looking document. "This," she said, her voice dripping with melodrama, "is the proof. The financial portfolio, just look at the numbers. They're a mess. All of her decisions. Reckless. We had to take over. We had to save the legacy." I sat alone on the antique love seat, a silent statue of heartbreak. I watched them gloat, my stomach twisting into a knot of utter despair. I was a victim of their monstrous greed, and the people who were supposed to be my protectors had sided with my tormentors. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. My home, my sanctuary, my grandmother's legacy, it was all gone. But as my eyes lingered on the decoy financial portfolio in Frank's hand, I felt it. A cold, hard flicker of something else. It was a single, tiny spark of satisfaction that felt so out of place, so wrong, that I almost choked on it. Was I truly going mad, to feel a sense of triumph at this moment of total defeat? I must be. It must be a desperate coping mechanism. My mind's last attempt to find a silver lining. I pushed the thought away, forcing the mask of a heartbroken victim back into place. They had won. They had taken my house, my family, and my dignity. What they didn't know was that the fire I felt in my eyes wasn't despair, but the cold, quiet glow of a fuse I had already lit. I would not just watch them burn. I would make them pay for every single lie. The game was far from over. The rain outside was a fitting backdrop for the past 2 months of my life, a constant, dreary narrative of heartbreak. But inside this private office, on the 18th floor of a downtown Boston skyscraper, the air felt crisp and dry. My legal advisor, Sarah, sat across from me, a picture of quiet concern. She was a perfect audience for my performance. "You've been through hell, Chloe," she said, her voice soft with what I now knew to be a carefully hidden sense of pride. "But it's going to be okay." I took a breath that wasn't a sob but a release, the first truly free breath I'd had in weeks. The weight of the grieving niece, the woman whose life had been shattered by her family's greed, fell away. I let a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. "It was never about me, was it?" I asked, my voice as steady as the foundation of my grandmother's house. Sarah's lips quirked. "No, it was never about you." She leaned forward, the concern in her eyes replaced by a sharp, professional glint. "So they took the bait?" I nodded, feeling a thrill, a genuine, honest-to-God thrill run through my veins. Hook, line, and sinker. I stood from my chair, a simple, fluid motion that felt like a rebellion after months of feigning hopelessness. My legs, firm and strong, carried me to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked out at the city, a sprawling monument to ambition. "The house isn't in my name, Sarah. It hasn't been for years. It's owned by a shell corporation, a beautiful, faceless entity that Evelyn and Frank can't touch." My despair was the perfect cover. I watched Sarah's face, a look of dawning comprehension in her eyes. "The secret verbal agreement? The one Evelyn's been parading around like a golden ticket?" "I invented it," I confirmed, turning back to face her. "It was the perfect carrot, a lie that would feed their ego and justify their invasion. And the financial portfolio I left on the desk? It was a decoy, a little treat to make them think they had a future. They took it all. They think they've won." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small tablet. "And here's the footage," I said, my voice low and fierce. The entire prank, the shove, the fake panic, their pathetic whispers of a joke gone wrong. "It's all here, every word, every lie." Sarah's eyes went wide as she watched the video. My voice was a ghost, a whisper in her ear. "They think they've stolen my house, but they've done me a favor. They've given me a reason to get it back. And now I have everything I need to get started. The game is finally afoot." The moment I closed the door to my private office, the performance ended. I let out a long, slow breath, a deep cleansing release of all the sorrow and helplessness I'd so carefully feigned for weeks. The mask of the heartbroken niece, the grieving victim, fell from my face. I stood up from the plush leather chair, no longer a woman confined by a false identity. I was Chloe again, and I was a mastermind. Across the table, Sarah, my best friend and lawyer, watched me with a look of stunned disbelief. She'd seen me a few hours ago, huddled in a blanket, my voice shaking with grief. Now she saw a woman calm, confident, and entirely in control. "What's going on, Chloe?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "What is all this?" I slid my tablet across the table, the screen lighting up with a glowing map. A small red dot blinked over the Portland area, moving erratically. "That, my friend, is a real-time notification," I explained. "The digital tripwire on the house's legal documents has been activated. Evelyn and Frank are already trying to sell my house, believing it's their property." Sarah's gaze snapped from the screen to me. "But you told me the deed was in my name, that the house was a part of my charity." "The deed they stole was the decoy," I corrected, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. "I created a fake deed, a perfectly crafted lie to lure them out. The real house is owned by a shell corporation I established years ago, and I am the only one with access to it. They think they've seized my most valuable asset, but they have nothing more than a piece of paper." Sarah leaned forward, a professional glint of admiration in her eyes. "And the financial portfolio they found? The one that supposedly proved you had secret savings." "That was my masterpiece," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "It's a decoy as well. It has a series of intentional flaws, little inconsistencies that will only show up under the most detailed scrutiny. It's a ticking clock, Sarah. They'll try to sell the house, and when they do, the flaws in that decoy portfolio will expose their incompetence and the fraud." I walked to the window, looking out at the city below, at the bustling world I was about to reclaim. They thought they were playing me, but they were playing right into my hands. Their greed has made them predictable, their arrogance their greatest weakness. The final phase of my plan was about to begin. I had to let them get what they wanted. I had to let them think they were winning. The screen in front of me was a weapon. I hovered my finger over the send button, the cold glow of the laptop illuminating my face. This wasn't about shouting my truth from the rooftops. It was about planting a single, insidious seed of doubt in the garden of their public image. I was no longer a writer crafting stories for a living. I was a strategist, and the narrative was my tool. The anonymous tip, a perfectly worded whisper, was aimed at a respected financial blog, the kind of place Evelyn and Frank followed religiously. It didn't name them. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it used key phrases like disgraced family member and hinted at questionable legal claims to a high-value property, creating a public relations nightmare for them. The tip, once sent, felt like a single drop of ink in a clear glass of water, and I watched with quiet satisfaction as it spread. By the afternoon, a headline from the blog popped up on my phone. Local property claim called into question. The rumor mill churned, and I was on the outside, a ghost in my own story. My parents, confused by the sudden public scrutiny, called me, their voices a mixture of panic and concern. "Chloe, what is this I'm hearing?" my father asked, his voice strained. "The news is saying something about our family. What is going on?" I took a deep, shuddering breath, a practiced performance of a woman overwhelmed. "Dad, I don't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm so lost. Evelyn said they had a right to the house, but now everyone's saying it's a scam. It's too much." My mother took the phone. "Honey, you just need to get better. This is all getting out of hand." I let a tear roll down my cheek, a final perfect touch to my act. "I just don't know what to do," I choked out, a phrase I'd used 100 times in the last few weeks. "I have no idea how to make this stop." I hung up, the words of my parents a hollow comfort. They still believed I was their victim, a woman too broken to be a threat. The truth, of course, was that I was a strategist. I knew exactly how to make this stop. I knew exactly what my next move was, and it was going to be a very public one. The clock was ticking, and they had no idea I was the one who set it. I had them exactly where I wanted them. I could almost see the public pressure building, the weight of 1,000 questions pressing down on them. This was just the beginning. I was ready. My finger hovered over the send button, a final act of a long-awaited vengeance. The first story had been a whisper of doubt. This one was a battering ram of truth. I didn't need to lie. I simply needed to expose. I hit send, a low hum of power running through my fingertips as I watched the digital package. A meticulously curated collection of financial reports, old bankruptcies and anonymous tips, disappear into the digital ether. My heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was thrumming with a calm, surgical satisfaction. The act was done. Now I just had to wait for the fallout. The headlines appeared within hours. The story, a journalistic masterpiece, dissected every one of Evelyn and Frank's past failures with clinical precision. It spoke of Frank's string of failed business ventures, of Evelyn's mounting credit card debt, and the subtle fraud they had perpetrated on a number of unsuspecting business partners. The public, so quick to believe their initial story of my mental breakdown, now began to question everything. The online comments were a beautiful symphony of doubt. The tides were turning, and I hadn't even had to lift a finger. The real show, however, was playing out on the hidden camera feed on my phone. The footage showed my parents, their faces etched with a confusion that was rapidly turning to anger, confronting Evelyn and Frank. "Who are you people?" my mother demanded, the usual sweetness in her voice replaced by a cold fury. "The news is saying you're thieves, Frank. Is any of this true?" The questions hit their mark, one after another, and I watched their carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. Later, I watched through the silent camera feeds as they ran in circles. Frank was pacing, his face a roadmap of panic. Evelyn was on the phone, her voice a low, furious whisper that was lost to the camera's muffled feed. They suspected everyone, the police, the press, their own so-called friends. They still didn't suspect me. They still believed I was the heartbroken niece, too fragile to be a threat. Their paranoia was a beautiful, fragile thing, and I watched it with the detached satisfaction of a scientist observing an experiment. My plan was working flawlessly. The public narrative had shifted. My family was finally turning on them, and I had a front-row seat to their mounting panic. This wasn't just about justice. It was about power. They thought they were a step ahead of me, but they were running in circles within a room I had designed. The real work was still to come, but for now, I would enjoy watching them squirm. The game was mine to win, and I was just getting started. I couldn't wait to see what my next move would be. The air in Sarah's private office was cool and still, a sharp contrast to the furious sea of emotions I had been navigating for weeks. On one side of the sleek mahogany table sat my best friend and lawyer, Sarah, her expression a mix of professional awe and nervous anticipation. On the other was Marcus, the private investigator I had quietly hired, a man whose face held the unflappable calm of someone who has seen it all. I, however, felt the most still of all. The trembling hands, the quavering voice, the tears, they were all a ghost of a performance I no longer needed to give. I placed a small tablet on the table and tapped the screen, bringing up a grainy security feed. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is a recording from the family dinner where Evelyn and Frank staged my fall. Watch closely." The footage flickered to life. On screen, a younger, more naive version of me descended the grand staircase. Then came the sudden shove, the flailing books, the sickening thud. The audio was clear enough to hear Jenna's terrified whisper, "It was a prank, Chloe. Just a prank gone wrong. It was a joke, okay?" The betrayal, so raw and painful at the time, was now nothing more than irrefutable evidence. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. "You installed these yourself?" he asked, a note of respect in his voice. "I did," I confirmed. I had a premonition. A cold dread that told me my home was no longer safe. Next, I slid a stack of legal documents across the table. "And these," I continued, "are the papers for the legal shell corporation I created. They all point to a company called the Coastal Trust. I had them re-examined by a specialist who confirmed it's all in order. My name is nowhere on the deed. When Evelyn and Frank try to seize my property, they will discover that it is a phantom, a house they cannot legally own." Sarah, who had known about the plan from the beginning, just shook her head in a mix of pride and apprehension. "You thought of everything." "I had to," I said, my gaze hardening. "The trap is set. I have the evidence. I have the legal leverage. Now it's time for the final confrontation." I stood up, the silence in the room as sharp and clean as my resolve. The end of their foolish game was just days away. They were walking into a lion's den, and I was going to be the one waiting for them. The mahogany doors of the meeting room felt heavy in my hands, a symbolic finality to the performance I was about to conclude. I didn't push them open. I simply let go, letting the momentum carry them inward with a low, dramatic creak. The room was already packed. My parents sat at the head of the table, their faces a mixture of expectation and quiet exhaustion. Across from them sat Evelyn and Frank, their posture arrogant and their smiles smug, the two of them a grotesque parody of success. The entire family, the entire tragic farce was present. The silence that followed my entrance was a work of art. They all saw me standing there, not the heartbroken niece they had expected, but a woman standing tall and confident. The shock on their faces was immediate and raw. Evelyn's jaw dropped, her practiced elegance shattering. Frank's smug smile evaporated, his eyes wide with a dawning dread. My parents just stared, their faces unreadable, trying to comprehend the sight of me walking. I walked to the head of the table, placing a small, sleek tablet on the mahogany surface. I didn't say a word, just let the tension build, letting the poison of their own guilt seep into the room. "I imagine you're all a little confused," I began, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just unleashed. "You see, the truth is I'm not heartbroken. My grief, the house theft, the prank, it was all a scam. A beautiful, elaborate scam." Evelyn's face turned a mottled shade of red. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her bravado gone. "We saw the footage. The house was stolen." I just smiled. "Yes, you did. You saw exactly what you were meant to see." I tapped the tablet, and a video clip flickered to life on the large screen behind me. It was footage from the hidden security camera I had installed in the house's study, a camera they had no idea existed. The video showed Evelyn and Frank, their faces contorted with glee, as they meticulously arranged the papers, celebrating their prank. The board members gasped, and I watched my parents' faces crumble. They looked at their children, then back at me, a silent question in their eyes. I tapped the screen again, and the video was replaced by an audio file. "And this," I said, "is a private conversation, a little something I recorded a few weeks ago." The room filled with the sound of Evelyn and Frank's voices, cackling as they talked about my mental breakdown, how they had finally gotten rid of the crazy bitch, and how stupid my parents were for believing me. The faces of my mother and father were a study in horror and betrayal. Their children, the ones they had always defended, were not the innocent victims they thought they were. They were the ones who had betrayed them. Their silence was the most satisfying sound in the world. I had them. And now the real game could begin. The tension in the living room was a living, breathing thing. My parents, their faces a roadmap of confusion and betrayal, sat on one side of the fireplace, while Evelyn and Frank, their usual arrogance still intact, sat on the other. They thought they had me cornered. They thought this was a negotiation, a final power play. They were wrong. I stood in the middle, a silence settling over me that was no longer the silence of grief, but of absolute control. "You're all a little confused," I began, my voice clear and steady, a stark contrast to the trembling whisper of the past few weeks. "You see, there are two versions of the truth, the one you've all been so eager to believe, and the one that is about to be revealed." I slid a thick folder across the coffee table toward my parents. "Mom, Dad, this is the legal deed for the house. The real one." They opened it, their eyes scanning the pristine pages, and their confusion only deepened. "But Chloe, your name isn't on this," my father said, his brow furrowed. "It's owned by a corporation." "That's right," I said, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips. "A corporation that I own? I transferred ownership months ago, a quiet precaution. The house was never a victim of your greed, Evelyn. It was simply the bait." Evelyn's face, a mask of smug assurance just moments ago, began to crack. "What are you talking about?" She stammered, her voice thin. "We have the deed, the one your grandmother gave us, the one that says we can live here for as long as we want." I pulled a second folder from behind my back, a flimsy yellowed document that looked every bit the part of an old, forgotten deed. "This," I said, holding it up for them all to see, "is the decoy deed. A beautiful, flawed piece of fiction that you stole from my desk last week." Frank jumped to his feet, his face ashen. "That's a lie. We didn't steal anything." "Didn't you?" I asked, my voice laced with a cold satisfaction. "I have the footage. I saw you both, celebrating your victory and your legal loophole. The deed you stole was a masterpiece of legal deception. It would have allowed you to sell the house. Yes, but the legal flaws in the language would have been discovered. The deed would have been nullified. You would have been left with nothing, and the house would have reverted to its rightful owner. I let you think you were winning, when in fact, you were just walking right into my trap." Evelyn and Frank were speechless, their arrogance replaced with pure, unadulterated terror. They looked at each other, their unspoken fear a palpable thing in the room. My father, his face ashen, turned to them. Did you really do this?" "The police are already on their way," I said, my voice cutting through the thick silence. "The charges are grand theft and corporate espionage. The legal documents you accessed, the ones that led you to believe the house was yours, were all a part of my trap. You've stolen a worthless piece of paper, and now you're going to pay for it." Evelyn began to cry, a pathetic, strangled sound. Frank just stood there, his jaw slack, his entire world crumbling around him. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, a symphony of their downfall. And I, the supposed victim, was the one who had written the music. The house felt different now, a quiet that no longer held the phantom weight of their presence. Evelyn and Frank were gone, their grand pronouncements and petty cruelties now just faint echoes in the silence. The news of their arrest had spread like wildfire, a public disgrace that felt both like a triumph and a profound sadness. I had my sanctuary back. My name, once dragged through the mud by their desperate lies, was now restored. But the victory felt hollow, a heavy thing balanced precariously on the edge of a chasm that had opened between my parents and me. My mother found me in the living room, staring out at the sea. Her face was etched with a sorrow that went far beyond regret. My father stood behind her, his hands clasped tight behind his back. The air was thick with the weight of unsaid things. "Chloe," my father began, his voice a broken thing. "We came to apologize. We were so blind. We should have believed you. We should have trusted our daughter." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We're so sorry, sweetheart. We fell for her act. We thought we were doing the right thing, trying to be a family. We didn't know." I looked at them, at the two people I had spent my entire life trying to protect. The rage I had felt had been a cold, surgical thing, a tool for my revenge. But now it was gone, replaced by a deep and abiding sorrow. The part of me that had wanted them to understand, to believe, was a raw wound. I accepted their apology. I told them it was okay. But a part of me knew, with a painful certainty, that our relationship would never be the same. The innocence was gone. The trust was gone. Days turned into weeks, and the sting of their betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. The legal battle had been a long and draining one, but with Sarah's brilliant help, every piece of evidence was laid out for the world to see. I had proven their lies. Now it was time to rebuild. I sat in my writing room, looking at the blueprint for my new project. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. It was a testament to the fact that I was no longer a victim, no longer a pawn. I was an architect of my own destiny, building a future on a foundation of my own making. The betrayal had broken me, but it had also forged me into something stronger. I had my sanctuary back, but this time it was more than just a home. It was a monument to my unbreakable will. And as I looked at the blueprint, a single, hopeful thought solidified in my mind. This was just the beginning. The silence of this office is not the emptiness of my old house. It's the silence of a well-oiled machine, the quiet hum of 100 small victories. I run a hand over the blueprint spread across my state-of-the-art desk, its clean lines and precise calculations a stark contrast to the chaotic mess of my recent past. This is the design for the Children's Hospital Wing, my masterpiece, now fully realized and free from contamination. This project, which was almost stolen from me, is now a monument to my resilience. The air smells of fresh paper and ambition, a scent I've come to savor. I sit here, not as a broken victim, but as a mastermind. The view from this window is a testament to that. The coastal Maine town, the ships in the harbor, the endless ocean. It's a world I hold in the palm of my hand. I think back to the pain, the raw, searing agony of Evelyn's betrayal. The tears, the sleepless nights, the public humiliation. It was all a performance, a carefully orchestrated symphony of my own defeat. But the pain of it was real in a way. The heartbreak of a family torn apart by greed had been a legitimate wound, even if my own motives were a calculated response. I had to let them think they were winning, to let them believe they were so much smarter than me. I realized their greed was a poison. It would have eventually consumed my grandmother's legacy, my career, and me along with it. My prank, the fake paralysis, the staged phone calls, the flawlessly flawed blueprints, was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation, a preemptive strike to save my family's name from the very people who carried it. The decoy blueprints were a necessary sacrifice, a key part of a plan to expose the rot at the heart of my family. I gave them a chance to prove my suspicions, and they took it with gusto. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it, so blinded by their avarice that they couldn't see the noose until it was around their necks. This is my new life, a path where I am no longer a victim, but the architect of my own destiny. The blueprint on the desk is not just a design. It's a constant reminder of a lesson hard-earned. Always trust your instincts, and never underestimate the quietest person in the room. This project is a symbol of my victory. It's a monument to the strength I found in the wreckage of their betrayal. But what happens when a mastermind gets bored? I don't know, but I'm about to find out. The game is over, but a new one is just beginning. I have a feeling the next game will be far more interesting. The polished mahogany of my new desk is cool against my fingertips, a solid testament to the ground I've reclaimed. I look out the panoramic window of my office, a view of the city skyline that feels like a personal triumph. This vista is far different from the sun-dappled sanctuary of my old writing room. That was the domain of Chloe, the quiet freelancer, the naive idealist who believed that hard work and goodness were enough. That Chloe is gone. In her place sits a woman forged in the fire of betrayal, a woman who has learned that the world is a chessboard and that kindness is often mistaken for a fatal weakness. I reflect on the power of my deceit, a cold clinical satisfaction blooming in my chest. Evelyn and Frank thought they had outsmarted me, that they had taken a house from a simple writer. They were so consumed by their own avarice that they couldn't see the truth. They couldn't see that I had anticipated their greed. They couldn't see the silent, strategic steps I had taken to protect myself and my legacy. I am no longer a naive freelancer. I am a shrewd businesswoman, a master of my own fate. I thought my trust in them was a given, an unspoken contract of family. Now I understand that trust is a weapon, a double-edged sword that can be used against you. They trusted that my grief was real, that my helplessness was genuine, and in doing so, they left themselves vulnerable. My quietness was never a weakness. It was a disguise that allowed me to sit back and observe, to see everything without being seen. They thought I was a puppet and they were pulling the strings. They were wrong. I was the one pulling them. I let them believe they were winning until it was too late. I let them believe they had outsmarted me until the noose was around their necks. The lesson was brutal, but the tuition was paid in full. My mind, once a chaotic landscape of creative ideas, is now a precise instrument of strategy. I have a plan B and a C and a D, all waiting in the wings. I've learned to protect myself, to trust my instincts, and to always be 2 steps ahead. I have a new company now, a shell corporation built on the ashes of their lies, and I am the architect. They had no idea that the prey they were hunting was a spider, and that they had just walked into the center of my web. My revenge is complete, but my quietness, my greatest strength, is still my most valuable asset, a tool I have only just begun to use. I am no longer a victim. I am the hunter. The therapist's office was a study in soft pastels and quiet desperation. My parents and I sat on separate couches, the air between us a heavy, unspoken thing. The silence was a language we had all become fluent in, a language of regret and accusation. Now, after the dust of Evelyn and Frank's deceit had settled, we were here to find a new one. It's important that we all start by acknowledging what brought us here, Dr. Allen said, her voice gentle, a stark contrast to the raw emotions simmering beneath the surface. Your parents are here because they want to earn back your trust, Chloe. My father, his face etched with a regret that seemed to age him 10 years, nodded. We were so blind, honey. We couldn't see it. We thought they were our family. I looked at my mother. The woman who had so easily dismissed my pain now looked at me with a profound, bone-weary sadness. We're so sorry, darling. For not listening, for not believing you. Their words were a balm, a quiet apology I had ached for, but they were also a wound. Their initial dismissal of my suffering had been a betrayal, a cold, hard fact that my mind, even now, couldn't reconcile with my love for them. I was a mastermind, yes, a strategist who had outwitted my enemies. But I was also a daughter whose parents had, for a time, chosen a convenient lie over her truth. I felt alone, I began, my voice soft and shaky, a genuine tremor. The lie was so deep, so intertwined with my real pain, that even I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I felt like I was screaming, but no one could hear me. The pain of your dismissal. It was worse than anything Evelyn or Frank could ever do. My mother's face crumpled. My father looked away, his shame a tangible presence in the room. They believed my words were a sign of healing, a raw and painful step toward reconciliation, and in a way they were. But to me, they were also a careful, calculated statement of power. I was no longer the victim. They were no longer the authority. I was the one who held the cards now. They were the ones who had to earn my trust. The healing process had begun, but it wasn't for me. It was for them, and it was going to be on my terms. The rain was a steady rhythm against the glass of our new office, a stark contrast to the quiet tempest that had once defined my life. I watched Sarah across the room, her head bowed over a document, a line of concentration etched between her brows. She looked up and caught my eye, offering a small, reassuring smile that spoke volumes. It was a language we'd perfected over time, one of shared secrets, risks taken, and a trust forged in the fires of my family's betrayal. My family. The word felt hollow now, a relic of a life I'd shed like a snake's skin. They had taught me a bitter lesson, that blood was not a bond but a cage. They had looked at my intellect, my ambition, and seen a threat, not a daughter. They had used my trust as a weapon, And in doing so, they had given me the greatest gift of all: freedom. Freedom to build something real, something that wasn't built on lies and conditional love. "It's done," Sarah said, her voice cutting through my thoughts. She slid the document across the polished mahogany desk. "The last of the assets from the old company have been transferred. The new corporation is fully funded, and we are officially ready to launch our first project." I picked up the paper, the signatures a testament to our success. "Our first project," I echoed, the words feeling powerful and true. "They never saw this coming." "They never saw us coming." "No," Sarah agreed, leaning back in her chair. "They saw what they wanted to see: a quiet girl, a desperate outcast. They never bothered to look past the surface." She was right. She had been the only one. From the moment I'd first confided in her about my plan, about my family's betrayal, she had believed in me. She had listened to my ideas, no matter how wild or impossible they seemed. She had been my rock, my sounding board, and now my partner. I looked at her, truly looked at her, at the steady kindness in her eyes, the unwavering support in her posture. She was my family, not because of a shared name or a genetic code, but because of a bond built on loyalty and a purpose we both believed in. True family, I realized, was not something you were born into, but something you chose, something you earned through trust and unwavering support. "What's next?" she asked, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "They're starting to scramble, you know. The news of their financial troubles is spreading." I smiled, a slow, confident grin. "Next," I said, leaning forward, my voice a low, satisfied whisper, "we start to rebuild. And this time we do it right. We build an empire they can only watch from a distance, a perfect monument to their own greed. They thought they had defeated me, but they only helped me. And now it's time for them to pay the price." The crisp morning air held the scent of freshly turned earth and victory. Below me, a sea of faces looked up, expectant and full of admiration. They saw a woman who had overcome a debilitating ordeal, who had fought for her family's legacy against all odds. They saw a hero. I saw the final act of a performance brought to its glorious end. The ceremonial shovel, gleaming silver, felt cool and solid in my hand, a perfect prop for the final scene. Beside me, my parents beamed. Their presence was a tangible warmth, a silent apology and a promise of a future. They had seen the truth, understood the painful sacrifice I had made, and their pride in me was tangible, a warmth I finally allowed myself to feel. My parents saw the full picture, the painful truth behind the public facade, and that was the only audience that truly mattered. I approached the microphone, the applause from the crowd a gentle roar. The sound swelled and then hushed as I began to speak. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Today we break ground on a new project. But this isn't just about a building, it's about resilience. It's about the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity." I spoke of the challenges we all face, of the hidden strength we find within ourselves when we are pushed to the brink. I spoke of perseverance and the importance of never giving up, even when the world seems to be against you. My words were carefully chosen, each one a double-edged sword. To the crowd, it was a moving story of personal triumph. To me, it was a private victory lap, a subtle celebration of a game well played. I smiled, thinking of the adversity I had so painstakingly constructed for myself, the perfect foil to this grand finale. When I finished, another wave of applause crashed over me. I looked out at the faces, a mix of employees, investors, and community leaders, all of them so moved by the story they thought they knew. They had no idea that the adversity was a carefully crafted tool, a lever I had pulled to set everything in motion. They didn't know that my grief was a performance, the pain a fabricated lie I had used to flush out the parasites. As I took the ceremonial shovel and turned the first spade of dirt, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. This was the true legacy, not just the building, but the knowledge that I was the master of my own story. I was no longer the victim of a family's deceit, but the architect of my own destiny.